The story of Elisa Lam is a modern ghost story, a terrifying, documented descent into the inexplicable that captured the world's imagination and forever cemented the dark reputation of one of America's most infamous buildings. It is a narrative that begins not with a crime, but with a simple, hopeful journey. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old Canadian student from Vancouver, traveling alone down the American West Coast. Her trip, documented on social media, was an attempt at self-discovery, a classic post-collegiate adventure intended to broaden her horizons and provide a necessary break from the stresses of her daily life, particularly her struggles with bipolar disorder. She was energetic, curious, and by all accounts, excited about her solo travel. In late January 2013, her journey brought her to downtown Los Angeles and to a destination that would prove to be her last, the Cecil Hotel. At first, the case was a routine missing person report, a common occurrence in a transit city like Los Angeles. Elisa, who had been maintaining daily contact with her family back in Canada, suddenly went silent after January 31st. Her belongings remained in her hotel room, but she was gone. The family alerted the Los Angeles Police Department, initiating an investigation that initially yielded nothing. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, and no immediate suspects. The focus of the case quickly intensified and transformed from a local search into a global phenomenon when, nearly 3 weeks later, the LAPD made a desperate and unusual decision. They released the last known footage of Elisa Lam alive. This single piece of CCTV footage, capturing her final moments inside a Cecil Hotel elevator, did not solve the case. Instead, it launched 1,000 theories, a million social media debates, and turned the death of a young woman into a viral enigma. The footage, grainy and time-stamped, shows Lam entering the elevator, pressing multiple floor buttons, and then retreating to the corner, seemingly hiding. She then steps out of the elevator, moving her hands in strange, almost frantic gestures, looking up and down the hallway as if talking to someone or something unseen, before disappearing entirely. It is a bewildering, unsettling 2 minutes and 38 seconds of footage that appears to defy rational explanation. Was she playing a bizarre game? Was she under the influence of drugs? Was she fleeing a visible or invisible assailant? Or was this a terrifying manifestation of a mental health crisis? The release of the video triggered a massive, decentralized global investigation led by armchair sleuths on Reddit and YouTube, turning the case into an unprecedented example of online true crime obsession. The mystery deepened when, weeks later, her body was finally discovered in a sealed water tank on the hotel's roof, a location that was locked and seemingly inaccessible to guests. How she got there, why she was there, and how she ended up submerged beneath the heavy tank lid remain questions that the official investigation struggled to answer convincingly. This documentary aims to dissect the entirety of the Elisa Lam case, moving beyond the sensationalism of the internet theories to analyze the forensic facts, the psychological possibilities, and the dark history of the hotel itself. The ultimate truth may lie not in a supernatural entity or a shadowy killer, but in the tragic collision of a vulnerable mind, a lack of institutional care, and the eerie, inescapable gravity of the Cecil Hotel. To fully comprehend the tragic final chapter of Elisa Lam's life, one must first understand the ominous, almost spectral character of the location where she met her end, the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The Cecil is not merely an old building. It is a monument to urban decay and a repository of decades of darkness, earning it a grim reputation as one of the most cursed and ill-omened hotels in American history. Constructed in the 1920s, the Cecil was initially conceived as a grand, opulent destination catering to wealthy businessmen and tourists. However, its proximity to Skid Row, a neighborhood synonymous with poverty, drug addiction, and crime, ensured a steady, decades-long decline into disrepute. By the time Elisa Lam arrived in 2013, the hotel had long rebranded itself, attempting to move away from its past. Yet its notoriety as a nexus of despair remained potent and undeniable. The Cecil Hotel is famously associated with a long, disturbing litany of suicides and violent deaths. From the 1930s onwards, the building became a magnet for people seeking a final, desperate exit. The windows of the Cecil were frequently the endpoints for tragic leaps, adding dozens of confirmed suicides to the hotel's permanent record. Beyond the suicides, the hotel has been linked to a number of unsolved and high-profile deaths, contributing to the persistent, dark mythology surrounding the property. One of the most macabre connections is to the infamous Black Dahlia murder of 1947, where the victim, Elizabeth Short, was rumored to have been seen at the Cecil shortly before her brutal death. While the connection remains unconfirmed, the proximity and the dark atmosphere of the hotel allowed the legend to take root and flourish. More disturbingly, the Cecil Hotel was a temporary residence of at least two notorious serial killers during their active murder sprees. The first was Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, who lived on the 14th floor of the hotel during the mid-1980s while he terrorized Southern California. Legend holds that Ramirez, often covered in blood from his nighttime attacks, would slip into the hotel unnoticed, utilizing the back alleys and the atmosphere of neglect as a shield. The second was Jack Unneweger, an Austrian serial killer who targeted sex workers and who also stayed at the Cecil in 1991. The fact that the hotel provided shelter to two men who embodied extreme violence further cemented its image as a place where dark forces congregated and thrived. This history of death and desolation created a unique atmosphere, a palpable, almost claustrophobic sense of unease that permeates a building. This pervasive darkness forms a crucial backdrop to the Elisa Lam case. Her final, bizarre moments in the elevator and her ultimate discovery in the water tank are seen by many as simply the latest, most inexplicable addition to the hotel's long, dark narrative. The Cecil Hotel is often cited as a contributing factor in conspiracy theories, with many believing the location itself, the epicenter of so much suffering and violence, somehow played an active role in her fate. The inescapable history of the Cecil Hotel ensures that the mystery of Elisa Lam will always be viewed through a lens of profound dread and urban tragedy. To fully comprehend the tragic final chapter of Elisa Lam's life, one must first understand the ominous, almost spectral character of the location where she met her end, the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The Cecil is not merely an old building. It is a monument to urban decay and a repository of decades of darkness, earning it a grim reputation as one of the most cursed and ill-omened hotels in American history. Constructed in the 1920s, the Cecil was initially conceived as a grand, opulent destination catering to wealthy businessmen and tourists. However, its proximity to Skid Row, a neighborhood synonymous with poverty, drug addiction, and crime, ensured a steady, decades-long decline into disrepute. By the time Elisa Lam arrived in 2013, the hotel had long rebranded itself, attempting to move away from its past. Yet its notoriety as a nexus of despair remained potent and undeniable. The Cecil Hotel is famously associated with a long, disturbing litany of suicides and violent deaths. From the 1930s onwards, the building became a magnet for people seeking a final, desperate exit. The windows of the Cecil were frequently the endpoints for tragic leaps, adding dozens of confirmed suicides to the hotel's permanent record. Beyond the suicides, the hotel has been linked to a number of unsolved and high-profile deaths, contributing to the persistent, dark mythology surrounding the property. One of the most macabre connections is to the infamous Black Dahlia murder of 1947, where the victim, Elizabeth Short, was rumored to have been seen at the Cecil shortly before her brutal death. While the connection remains unconfirmed, the proximity and the dark atmosphere of the hotel allowed the legend to take root and flourish. More disturbingly, the Cecil Hotel was a temporary residence of at least two notorious serial killers during their active murder sprees. The first was Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, who lived on the 14th floor of the hotel during the mid-1980s while he terrorized Southern California. Legend holds that Ramirez, often covered in blood from his nighttime attacks, would slip into the hotel unnoticed, utilizing the back alleys and the atmosphere of neglect as a shield. The second was Jack Unneweger, an Austrian serial killer who targeted sex workers and who also stayed at the Cecil in 1991. The fact that the hotel provided shelter to two men who embodied extreme violence further cemented its image as a place where dark forces congregated and thrived. This history of death and desolation created a unique atmosphere, a palpable, almost claustrophobic sense of unease that permeates a building. This pervasive darkness forms a crucial backdrop to the Elisa Lam case. Her final, bizarre moments in the elevator and her ultimate discovery in the water tank are seen by many as simply the latest, most inexplicable addition to the hotel's long, dark narrative. The Cecil Hotel is often cited as a contributing factor in conspiracy theories, with many believing the location itself, the epicenter of so much suffering and violence, somehow played an active role in her fate. The inescapable history of the Cecil Hotel ensures that the mystery of Elisa Lam will always be viewed through a lens of profound dread and urban tragedy. The full CCTV footage of Elisa Lam's final known moments is the single most important and disturbing piece of evidence in her case, a short, grainy recording that serves as a Rosetta Stone for all subsequent speculation. The footage, released by the LAPD nearly 3 weeks after her disappearance, captured her actions inside one of the Cecil Hotel's elevators and immediately defied rational explanation, turning the case into a global internet phenomenon. The video begins with Lam entering the elevator alone. She immediately proceeds to press multiple floor buttons, a common action, yet one that, in context, is unusual. The elevator doors, however, fail to close, remaining wide open for the entirety of the 2 minutes and 38 seconds of the clip. This technical anomaly is the first major point of contention and confusion. Lam then exhibits her most peculiar behavior. She moves into the back corner of the elevator, pressing herself against the wall, seemingly attempting to hide or avoid being seen by someone or something in the hallway. Her head peeks out tentatively, suggesting she is monitoring the hallway. This is the moment where the interpretation splits. Is she playfully hiding from a friend, or is she terrified and evading a threat? The video then shows Lam stepping out of the elevator, standing just outside the doorway. She engages in a series of highly erratic and unusual movements. She waves her hands in complex, almost balletic gestures that are difficult to interpret. Some see pleading, some see argument, and some see a kind of manic signaling. Her body language is intensely agitated, alternating between fear and a strange confidence. She looks up and down the hallway several times, often directing her gestures toward the left, implying an unseen presence or a focus of her distress in that direction. A crucial segment shows Lam moving to the control panel of the elevator, where she appears to press the buttons repeatedly and quickly, possibly in frustration that the doors are not closing. Finally, Lam simply walks out of frame toward the left side of the hallway, never to return. Moments after her disappearance from frame, the elevator doors finally close, then open and close again, an action that seems to resolve the technical malfunction only after she has left. The video's release was a tactical move by the LAPD, hoping that the public could identify her or the potential person she was interacting with. Instead, it became the subject of intense, obsessive analysis by millions of amateur sleuths. Every gesture, every glance, and the technical glitch of the elevator doors was dissected for hidden meaning. The core anomaly remains. Why did the doors fail to close? And what was she interacting with that drove her to such a bizarre display? The full CCTV footage, intended to bring clarity, only plunged the case into deeper, more unsettling levels of mystery, suggesting that the truth of her disappearance lay in the terrifying psychological state or the interaction she had in that final, documented moment. The 2 minutes and 38 seconds of CCTV footage from the Cecil Hotel elevator serve as a primary visual text of the Elisa Lam mystery. But to understand it, one must engage in a careful decoding of her actions through the lens of clinical psychology. This analysis is crucial in distinguishing a mental health crisis from external foul play. The most plausible and medically grounded explanation for her erratic behavior lies in her documented struggle with bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is a mental illness characterized by extreme mood swings, including episodes of mania and depression. Lam's actions in the elevator, The frantic pressing of multiple buttons, the hiding, and the dramatic hand gestures are highly consistent with a person experiencing a severe manic or psychotic episode. In a psychotic state, a person can experience delusions, false, fixed beliefs, or hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that are not there. The hand gestures, which appear to be arguments or pleading directed at an unseen entity, could be her responding to auditory or visual hallucinations, a common symptom of psychosis. Her attempts to hide in the corner and peek out could be interpreted as intense paranoia, a feeling that she was being pursued or watched by an invisible threat. The technical anomaly of the elevator doors also aligns with a possible state of agitation and psychosis. In many older elevators, pressing multiple buttons or preventing the door from closing by activating the sensor can lead to a temporary malfunction where the system is confused about its next action. Lam's actions, frantically pressing buttons and possibly moving in and out of the sensor, could have been a mechanical cause of the door's failure to close, a manifestation of her hyper-agitated state, rather than a sign of a third-party intervention. However, many conspiracy theorists reject the psychological explanation, pointing to the specific movements and nonverbal cues as evidence of external threat. They argue that her movements are too intentional to be purely random psychosis. Some interpret her gestures as a communication with an accomplice or a plea for help being directed to a visible person just outside the frame. The fact that she eventually walks out of the elevator frame and the doors immediately close is cited as evidence that she was either pursued or coerced into leaving the safety of the elevator. The contrast between the two interpretations is stark. One sees a tragic collapse of mental stability, where her own mind was a killer. The other sees a calculated threat from an unknown assailant that manipulated her into leaving protection of the elevator. The official investigation and subsequent coroner's report leaned heavily toward the mental health explanation, as there was no evidence of physical struggle or defensive wounds on her body. Ultimately, the elevator footage is a devastating document of a young woman in extreme psychological distress, and while the visual evidence is subject to multiple interpretations, the most tragic reading of lines are bizarre, frantic actions with the known reality of her battle against a destabilized mind. The first phase of the Elisa Lam investigation, the missing person case, was characterized by a limited initial police response followed by a period of frustrating stagnation, a trajectory that later drew heavy criticism from the public and the media. When Elisa Lam's family first alerted the Vancouver police, who then contacted the LAPD, the case was classified as routine. Initial efforts focused on standard procedures, checking her hotel room, speaking to hotel staff, and searching the immediate vicinity of the Cecil Hotel. The initial findings were limited. Her belongings were present, suggesting she had not left voluntarily or prematurely, and there were no immediate signs of struggle or forced entry into her room. The environment of the Cecil Hotel, situated on the edge of the chaotic Skid Row area, contributed to the initial low priority of the case. Missing person cases in this area were sadly common, and often, individuals simply chose to disappear or found in the transient population days later. This perceived context likely contributed to a less aggressive initial search. Police quickly interviewed hotel staff, who confirmed Lam's presence and the earlier complaint about her unusual behavior, which suggested that her disappearance might be related to a psychological episode rather than a violent crime. The investigation quickly entered a phase of stagnation. Weeks passed with no new leads. The lack of cell phone activity, ATM withdrawals, or any sign of her exiting the hotel meant that investigators were forced to focus their entire search within the confines of the massive building, a daunting task due to the sheer size and age of the Cecil. Searches of the public areas of the hotel, including hallways, lobbies, and common rooms, yielded nothing. The police were working with limited resources and were seemingly reluctant to dedicate substantial manpower to a case they possibly viewed as a voluntary disappearance complicated by mental health issues. This lack of visible progress eventually led to the crucial decision, the release of the elevator CCTV footage. The internal investigation had hit a wall, and the LAPD hoped that the power of public information might break the case. This move, however, backfired dramatically in terms of maintaining investigative control. While it brought unprecedented attention to the case, It also opened the floodgates for public criticism regarding the perceived slow, lackadaisical initial response. Critics argued that the police should have been more diligent, especially given the hotel's notorious history, and that a more thorough and immediate search of restricted areas might have located her sooner. The stagnation of the official investigation created a void that was quickly filled by the online community. The failure of the police to provide clear answers, coupled with the ambiguity of the released footage, fueled the burgeoning conspiracy theories. The initial missing person case was, therefore, not just a procedural failure, but the catalyst that transformed a tragic incident into a global mystery, highlighting the limitations of conventional law enforcement when faced with an incident that seemingly defied physical evidence and logic. The investigation into Elisa Lam's disappearance reached its tipping point and was irrevocably altered by the LAPD's calculated decision to publicly release the infamous CCTV footage on February 19, 2013, approximately 3 weeks after she was last seen. This unprecedented move, born out of investigative desperation, was intended to generate leads, but instead, it unleashed a massive, often unmanageable wave of global public interest and speculation. For the LAPD, the case had gone cold. They had exhausted their internal searches and had no evidence of foul play or an external suspect. The footage, which showed Lam's highly erratic behavior, was the only remaining piece of tangible evidence regarding her final moments. By releasing the video, the police hoped to identify the person Lam might have been interacting with, or, at the very least, prompt someone who knew her to interpret her bizarre actions as a sign of her mental state. The public reaction was immediate, intense, and overwhelming. The video instantly went viral, circulating across YouTube, Reddit, and various online true crime forums. The sheer strangeness of Lam's actions, the seemingly panic hiding, the repeated pressing of the elevator buttons, and the frantic, theatrical hand gestures provided fertile ground for every imaginable theory. The video was compelling because it was an unsolvable visual puzzle presented in real time. Millions of amateur sleuths or web sleuths became instantly engaged, using tools from video enhancement to psychological analysis to dissect every frame. The tipping point marked a moment when the investigation ceased to be a private police matter and became a decentralized, global obsession. The online community dissected the elevator anomaly, debated the meaning of her gestures, and focused intensely on the dark, peculiar history of the Cecil Hotel. This intense public pressure, while often generating spurious theories, also indirectly forced the police to dedicate more resources to the case, preventing it from being quietly closed as an unsolved missing person incident. The release of the footage was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it ensured the case would not be forgotten. The persistent public debate and scrutiny forced continued official investigation. On the other hand, it polluted the informational landscape with noise and speculation, creating a massive distraction from forensic facts. The most profound effect of the footage's release was the way it transformed Elisa Lam's tragic fate into a cultural meme, a modern-day myth of the haunted hotel, the lone traveler, and the terrifying, inexplicable power of the internet to both investigate and distort reality. The release of the footage was the moment the mystery was born, eclipsing the simple reality of the missing person case with the terrifying, viral power of the unexplained. The release of the CCTV footage ignited a firestorm of public hysteria that was simultaneously beneficial and detrimental to the search for the truth. This period saw the unprecedented rise of amateur sleuths, or web sleuths, who, operating primarily on platforms like Reddit and YouTube, took over the investigation, creating a parallel, uncontrolled, and often invasive online inquiry. This mass mobilization of internet users demonstrated the power of collective focus, but also the profound ethical danger of crowdsourced investigation. The hysteria was fueled by two primary factors: the unsettling ambiguity of the elevator video and the notorious history of the Cecil Hotel. The clip provided the raw, primary source material, and every pause, every movement, and every reflection in the elevator's steel became subject to relentless, often conflicting, analysis. Thousands of theories immediately began to circulate. Some theorized that the footage was edited or time compressed, suggesting the LAPD was deliberately withholding information. Others pointed to specific shadows or reflections that they believed proved the presence of a second person, the killer, just out of frame. Still others, fixated on the hotel's macabre past, proposed supernatural explanations, suggesting Elisa was interacting with a ghost or was a victim of a lingering curse. The amateur sleuths often displayed remarkable diligence. They tracked down hotel layouts, identified the songs Lam had last listened to, and painstakingly tried to correlate her social media posts with her psychological state. One notable finding was the identification of a man named Pablo Vergara, known online as Morbid, whose previous music videos, which referenced the Cecil Hotel and contained violent, dark themes, made him an immediate, though ultimately innocent, target of the online mob. This incident highlighted the dark side of the online investigation. The web sleuths, fueled by the anonymity of the internet, frequently crossed ethical lines. They engaged in doxing, publishing private information, cyberbullying, and relentless harassment of individuals they deemed suspicious, ruining reputations based solely on circumstantial online evidence. Vergara, who was eventually cleared by police and had a concrete alibi, suffered immense psychological damage from the relentless public persecution. The police investigation was significantly affected by this online noise. While the tips and theories provided a constant stream of information, much of it was spurious, distracting officers from methodical forensic work. The public's insistence on a dramatic, sensational conclusion, a shadowy killer or a supernatural force, often overshadowed the more mundane, tragic possibility of a mental health crisis gone wrong. The rise of the amateur sleuths transformed the case into a cultural touchstone for the digital age, demonstrating the public's insatiable appetite for true crime and mystery, but also providing a stark warning about the dangers of unchecked, decentralized online justice. The agonizing 3-week-long search for Elisa Lam came to a shocking, definitive end with a discovery, a grim, improbable event that occurred not through police work or public tip-offs, but through a routine maintenance check provoked by guest complaints. The location of the discovery, a sealed water tank on the roof of the Cecil Hotel, added a final, horrifying layer of inexplicable mystery to the case. The discovery was initiated by multiple guest complaints about the hotel's water quality. Guests reported that the water tasted foul, looked discolored, and had a strange smell. These complaints grew persistent enough to warrant a full maintenance investigation. On February 19, 2013, a hotel maintenance worker was dispatched to the roof to check the 4 massive 1,000-gallon cisterns that supplied the hotel's water for drinking, bathing, and cleaning. Access to the roof was strictly controlled. It required a separate key card or access code and was protected by an alarm system on the emergency door to prevent unmonitored entry by guests. The water tanks themselves were each approximately 4 feet wide and 8 feet tall, sitting on concrete blocks. To check the water level, the maintenance worker had to climb a ladder to reach the top of the tanks. Upon reaching the top of one of the tanks, the worker noticed that the heavy, bolted-down hatch was slightly ajar. Peering inside the cistern, he made the horrifying discovery. The naked body of Elisa Lam was floating, submerged in the water. The immediate shock of the discovery confirmed the worst fears of the investigators and the public, but it also posed a series of immediate, profound, and seemingly impossible questions. How did she get onto the roof? If the roof access door was locked and alarmed, how did she bypass the security? How did she get into the tank? The tanks were too tall to climb without a ladder, which she would not have had access to. The lid was heavy and awkward to manipulate, and the tank itself was a confined space. It was physically implausible for a single, small woman, especially one potentially in a weakened state, to have lifted the heavy lid, climbed into the tank, and then somehow closed the lid behind her. Furthermore, the fact that her body had been floating in the hotel's water supply for approximately 3 weeks added an extra layer of grim morbidity to the case. The discovery in the water tank immediately shifted the focus of the investigation from a missing person case to a full-blown homicide investigation, a theory that the forensic evidence would later challenge. But the sheer, baffling impossibility of the logistics surrounding the discovery ensured that the mystery of Elisa Lam would forever be linked to the dark confines of the Cecil Hotel's rooftop. Following the macabre discovery of Elisa Lam's body in the Cecil Hotel water tank, the autopsy report became the singular, crucial document intended to provide definitive answers. The findings, released months later by the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner Coroner, were critical, yet they ultimately failed to satisfy the public's thirst for a dramatic conclusion, leaving the question of foul play ambiguous. The official cause of death determined by the coroner was accidental drowning. This conclusion was reached after meticulous examination, which revealed several key forensic facts. Firstly, there was no evidence of external physical trauma. Lam's body showed no defensive wounds, no bruises consistent with struggle, and no signs of sexual assault. This critical finding severely weakened the prevailing public theories of a homicide committed by an assailant. The lack of violence suggested that if another person was involved, they did not physically force her into the tank. Secondly, the toxicology report provided significant insights into her state of mind. The report confirmed the presence of several prescription drugs in her system, including those used to treat her bipolar disorder. However, the levels of these medications were inconsistent. Some medications were found at lower than therapeutic levels, suggesting she may have been under-medicating or had recently stopped taking her medication correctly. This destabilization of her prescribed regimen aligns perfectly with the psychological theory that she was experiencing a severe psychotic or manic episode at the time of her death. Thirdly, the examination ruled out any significant internal injuries or conditions that might have led to her death prior to entering the water. The physical evidence was therefore consistent with the theory of a psychotic episode where Lam, suffering from delusions, voluntarily accessed a roof and entered the water tank in an attempt to hide or escape an unseen threat, ultimately drowning by accident. However, the report's conclusion of accidental drowning created a massive, persistent conflict with the physical impossibility of the event. The coroner's report explained how she died drowning and why she was vulnerable to medication noncompliance, but it could not explain the logistics, how a person in a psychotic state could bypass the locked roof door and then manage to lift a heavy, awkward water tank lid and submerge herself, especially when the lid was found closed or ajar. This glaring gap between the forensic findings, accidental death, and the physical evidence, impassable obstacles, is the central, enduring tension of the Elisa Lam case. The official report intended to close the case instead solidified the mystery, ensuring that the public, unsatisfied with the mundane explanation of an accidental death, would continue to generate and pursue theories of external foul play and conspiracy, thereby ensuring the case's permanent place in modern true crime lore. The most straightforward and officially accepted conclusion regarding the death of Elisa Lam falls under Theory 1, accidental drowning and bipolar disorder. This theory posits that Lam's death was a tragic result of her severe mental illness, a psychotic episode that led her to a precarious location where she inadvertently met her end. This explanation, embraced by the Los Angeles Police Department and the coroner's office, relies heavily on the established medical facts of the case. Lam's history of bipolar disorder, a condition characterized by extreme mood swings and the potential for psychosis, forms the core foundation of this theory. Psychosis, a state involving a detachment from reality, often manifests through paranoid delusions, auditory or visual hallucinations, and extreme agitation. The behavior captured in the elevator CCTV footage, the frantic pressing of buttons, the hiding, and the theatrical, desperate hand gestures, is interpreted by mental health professionals as a classic, textbook manifestation of a psychotic break. In this state, Lam would have been acting on internal commands or delusions, perceiving a threat that was entirely real to her, even if invisible to others. This theory suggests that her desperate flight from the perceived threat is what drove her to one place she believed offered safety or an escape route: the Cecil Hotel rooftop. The logical difficulty of accessing the roof in the water tank is addressed by factoring in the effects of the manic or psychotic state. An individual experiencing a severe manic episode often exhibits superhuman strength and a profound disregard for personal safety, combined with distorted perception of risk. It is possible that the unlocked fire escape door, which some hotel employees reportedly left open at times, provided her initial access to the roof. Once there, the lack of inhibitions associated with her condition could have led her to view the large water tank, sitting high on its platform, as a natural hiding place or a fortress. While the lid was heavy, the sheer force and adrenaline of a psychotic break, combined with the fact that the lid was not securely bolted but merely closed, could have allowed her to push it open, climb the exterior ladder or maintenance blocks, and submerge herself. The subsequent accidental drowning is attributed to the fact that once she was inside the tank, the effects of the cold water, the sudden exhaustion after the hyperactive episode, and the difficulty of opening the heavy lid from the inside would have made escape virtually impossible. Furthermore, the toxicology report, which showed inconsistent levels of her prescribed medication, lends significant credence to this theory, suggesting her mental state was dangerously destabilized at the time of the incident. This theory is the most scientifically sound, relying on forensic evidence, lack of trauma, and medical history, bipolar disorder. It paints a picture of a profoundly tragic accident, a lonely death caused not by a shadowy killer, but by the overwhelming, invisible power of mind in crisis, where the only logical conclusion is that she entered the water tank under her own power, driven by delusion and drowned accidentally. Theory 2 moves away from the purely medical, suggesting a possible confluence of Elisa Lam's psychological vulnerability with the intense, dark history and atmosphere of the Cecil Hotel itself. This is a dark tourist and the influence of the hotel theory, which examines the concept of environmental suggestion on a psychologically fragile mind. The Cecil Hotel, as previously established, is a notorious location, a hub for urban legends, true crime history, and decades of death. The concept of dark tourism, visiting sites associated with death, tragedy, or the macabre, has become popular, and while there is no evidence Lam was intentionally seeking out the hotel's dark history, simply being immersed in that environment could have had a profound, negative psychological impact. For a young woman already battling bipolar disorder, the hotel's pervasive atmosphere of decay, isolation, and past violence could have served as a powerful environmental trigger for her psychotic episode. The hotel's history of suicides and its association with serial killers like Richard Ramirez may have unconsciously or consciously fueled her delusions, transforming the building and her mind into a place of mortal danger or supernatural presence. The theory suggests that her paranoia, captured in the elevator footage, was a reaction to the psychological weight of the Cecil, manifesting as a delusion that she was being pursued by a killer or an evil entity linked to the hotel's past. Furthermore, the theory touches on the possibility of a drug-induced psychosis that was aggravated by the environment. While the toxicology report showed only prescription drugs, the proximity to Skid Row and the transient nature of the hotel mean that exposure to illicit substances, or the mere suggestion of them, cannot be entirely discounted by some speculators. However, the stronger element of this theory lies in suggestibility. An emotionally vulnerable individual in a highly charged, notorious location may find their internal psychological struggles amplified. The hotel's physical structure, the endless, dimly lit hallways, the old, erratic elevators, and the dark, inaccessible roof, became the perfect physical stage for a psychological collapse. The hotel, in this theory, is not merely the setting for the tragedy. It is an active participant, its history acting as a catalyst that tipped Lam from a state of manageable mental illness into full-blown psychosis. Her frantic actions in the elevator, where she desperately pressed buttons and appeared to be hiding, are seen as a response to the hotel's inherent dread of final, futile attempt to escape the overwhelming sense of doom that the building itself projected onto her vulnerable psyche. This theory provides a nuanced understanding, suggesting that the tragedy was a collision between a vulnerable mind and a toxic environment, where the hotel's dark history became tragically intertwined with the final moments of a young traveler's life. The simplest and most sensational explanation for the death of Elisa Lam, and the one most favored by the online community, is Theory 3, foul play, which posits the existence of an unidentified killer who manipulated, coerced, or forced Lam to her death. This theory primarily arises from the immense difficulty in reconciling the official accidental drowning conclusion with the sheer logistical impossibility of accessing the water tank. The central argument of the foul play theory is the inaccessibility of the rooftop. If the door to the roof was locked and alarmed, as it officially should have been, then Lam could not have accessed the area without a key or an accomplice. Therefore, a hotel employee, a former employee, or a guest with illicit access must have been involved in getting her to the roof. The proponents of this theory dismiss the psychosis explanation of lifting the heavy tank lid, arguing that it would require two physically capable people or specific tools, suggesting that the killer either forced her into the tank or held the lid open for her to hide inside before submerging her and leaving the lid ajar. This theory re-examines the CCTV footage through the lens of coercion. Instead of seeing Lam's gestures as a reaction to psychosis, they are interpreted as communication or confrontation with an assailant standing just out of the camera's view, deliberately positioned in the blind spot of the wide-angle lens. Her frantic button pressing is seen as a desperate attempt to trigger the elevator alarm or force the doors closed before the killer could enter. Her final, decisive move to walk out of the elevator frame is interpreted not as a choice, but as a result of threat or command from the unseen individual, leading her to her doom. A key piece of circumstantial evidence often cited is the unusual delay in releasing the footage, which was made public weeks after her disappearance. Conspiracy theorists argue that the delay provided the LAPD with time to edit or shorten the footage, potentially removing the killer's image to protect them or conceal a wider scandal involving hotel staff or connected individuals. Furthermore, the fact that the autopsy found no evidence of sexual assault or trauma does not entirely dismiss the foul play theory. A killer focused on stealth and concealment, or one whose motive was not sexual, could have successfully subdued Lam, either through psychological coercion or through a drug that would not show up in the standard toxicology screen, before disposing of the body. The simplest and most compelling logic supporting this theory is the question of the lid. The water tank lid was heavy. The effort required to manipulate it, coupled with the difficulty of navigating the large tank, suggests an external force was likely involved, whether to subdue her and place her in the water or to ensure she could not escape. Despite the lack of forensic evidence to support homicide, the physical and logistical improbabilities surrounding the rooftop access and the tank itself ensure that the unidentified killer theory remains a powerful and persistent explanation for the mystery of Elisa Lam's death. The official police narrative surrounding Elisa Lam's death is critically undermined by the existence of several missing clues and circumstantial pieces of evidence that cast doubt on the simplicity of the accidental drowning conclusion. These anomalies, particularly those related to hotel security features, demand a deeper look into the operational failures of the Cecil Hotel. The most significant missing clue is the state of the rooftop access door and the alarm system. According to official hotel protocol, the door leading from the top floor fire escape to the roof should have been locked and equipped with an operational alarm. This security measure was in place to prevent guests from accessing the area, which was considered dangerous due to the high ledges and open machinery. If the door was functioning correctly, Lam could not have accessed the roof without a key or specific access code, strongly suggesting a breach of security, either by her or by an accomplice. However, testimony from various sources, including former employees and local journalists, suggested that the roof door was frequently left propped open or was known to be faulty due to lax security protocols at the time, particularly given the hotel's high turnover of staff and the general state of disrepair. This is a crucial missing clue. If the door was unlocked, Lam could have accessed the roof during a psychotic episode, believing it to be a safe path of escape. If the door was locked, it supports the foul play theory, implicating someone with authorized access. Another major, related missing clue is the functionality of the roof alarm system. Even if the door was locked, forcing it open should have triggered an alarm, alerting hotel staff or security. There is no public record or report of an alarm being triggered on the night of Lam's disappearance. This silence suggests that either the alarm system was broken or the door was opened using the correct access method, implicating someone with a key or code. Furthermore, the question of the clothing is a minor yet persistent missing clue. Lam's body was found naked in the water tank, with her clothing recovered floating nearby. The official explanation attributes this to paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon observed in hypothermia victims where the person, feeling an intense burning sensation due to blood flow changes, instinctively begins to remove their clothes. While plausible, conspiracy theorists view the nakedness as a classic signature of sexual crime, despite the lack of forensic evidence. Finally, the delay in searching the roof is a significant operational failure. The police initially searched only the public areas of the hotel. The roof, considered inaccessible, was not searched until weeks later, and then only because of the guests' water complaints. This failure to search the area where she was eventually found underscores a reliance on procedural norms and the failure to consider the unconventional logic that defines a psychological crisis in an environment like the Cecil Hotel. These missing clues, particularly the ambiguity of the locked door and the silence alarm, remain the primary fuel for suspicion that the full truth of Elisa Lam's final moments has not been, or cannot be, fully explained by simple accident. The tragic case of Elisa Lam cannot be fully discussed without acknowledging the profound impact of the urban legends and perceived curses associated with the Cecil Hotel, a phenomenon that inextricably linked her death to the infamous Black Dahlia murder and other dark historical events. These parallels, though circumstantial and non-forensic, became the psychological foundation for many of the online conspiracy theories. The most prominent connection is to Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, whose brutal unsolved murder in 1947 remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Rumors have long persisted that Short stayed or was last seen at the Cecil Hotel shortly before her body was found mutilated and bisected miles away. While these rumors have never been definitively proven, the proximity of the hotel to the area where Short was last seen, combined with the general atmosphere of violence and decay, created a narrative link. The Lam case, with its combination of a beautiful young woman, a public search, and a mysterious death, immediately drew comparisons to the Black Dahlia story in the media and the public imagination. The concept of a Cecil Hotel curse is a psychological theory that suggests the hotel itself is somehow haunted or imbued with a supernatural malevolence due to the sheer volume of suicides and violent deaths that have occurred within its walls. Proponents of this idea suggest that the hotel operates as a kind of psychological vortex, feeding on the vulnerable and drawing them to a tragic end. In this context, Elisa Lam's erratic behavior in the elevator is interpreted as her interacting with an invisible entity or demonic force that tormented her and ultimately led her to the water tank. This non-physical explanation resonates deeply with the public because it provides a simple, dramatic answer to the complex, logistical impossibilities of the case. It explains how she could have bypassed physical security measures and how the elevator doors could have behaved erratically. The hotel itself was acting as a mechanism of death. Furthermore, the conspiracy theorists drew parallels between Lam's death and a tuberculosis outbreak that occurred in the vicinity of the hotel around the time of her death. They obsessively linked the Lam-Elisa name to a rare, multi-drug resistant form of tuberculosis, Lam-Elisa test, suggesting a deeper government-level conspiracy where Lam was an accidental casualty or a carrier of a secret biological agent. This theory, which is highly speculative and devoid of evidence, demonstrates how the urban legend of a dark place can attract and absorb any available coincidental information to weave a grand, terrifying narrative. Ultimately, the parallels between Elisa Lam and the Black Dahlia and the belief in the hotel's curse serve as a cultural mechanism to cope with the senselessness of her death. By embedding her story within a history of darkness, the public transforms the tragic death of a mentally ill woman into a grand, solvable mystery, perpetuating the fame and notoriety of the Cecil Hotel itself. The toxicology and medical review performed by the coroner stands as the firmest pillar supporting the official conclusion of accidental drowning. This forensic analysis, however, became a point of intense contention, as the findings related to Elisa Lam's prescription medications provided a clear medical explanation for her behavior, while simultaneously failing to fully account for physical logistics of her death. The toxicology report confirmed that Lam had been prescribed multiple medications to manage her bipolar disorder, including antidepressants, mood stabilizers, and antipsychotics. Crucially, the test indicated that the levels of these drugs in her system were inconsistent and lower than prescribed therapeutic range. This finding is central to the medical theory. It strongly suggests that Lam had either missed doses or intentionally stopped taking her medication in the days leading up to her death. This non-compliance is the most common cause of severe psychotic or manic relapse in patients with bipolar disorder. The lack of proper medication would have plunged her into a state of extreme agitation, paranoia, and dissociation from reality, perfectly aligning with her bizarre actions in the elevator. Furthermore, the medical review of the body, which revealed the presence of pitting edema, swelling caused by fluid accumulation in the lower extremities, is a finding that some medical experts argue points to a possible side effect of her medication or her general state of health. However, the most compelling medical argument against foul play remains a lack of trauma. The comprehensive autopsy found no physical signs of a struggle, no cuts, bruises, or defensive wounds on her body. This finding makes it medically difficult to argue that she was violently overpowered or forced into the water tank, bolstering the accidental drowning theory. The concept of paradoxical undressing also falls under medical review. The fact that her body was found naked in the water, with her clothes nearby, is explained as a result of the onset of hypothermia. As the body's core temperature drops, a phenomenon occurs where the victim feels intensely hot, leading them to instinctively remove their clothes before succumbing to the cold and drowning. This medical explanation provides a rational, if tragic, counterpoint to the online theories suggesting sexual assault. The role of medication and psychosis as the primary drivers of the event is a conclusion favored by forensic experts. They argue that the immense confusion and terror of a psychotic state led her to seek refuge in the one place she perceived as safe, the water tank, and that the physical effort of climbing and entering was fueled by an adrenaline-laced, manic force. The medical evidence points to a self-inflicted tragedy. The mind, not an external killer, was a decisive factor. While the medical review provides a how and why, psychosis and drowning, its inability to fully resolve the logistical where, the locked roof door and heavy lid, is why the conspiracy theories continue to flourish, exploiting the gap between forensic fact and physical improbability. The death of Elisa Lam, particularly the official conclusion of accidental drowning, created a conspiracy vortex into which various unrelated details were sucked, woven into complex, often illogical, and highly sensationalized narratives. The most prominent example of this is the obsessive linking of her case to a tuberculosis outbreak and other spurious online connections that defy rational investigation. This phenomenon demonstrates the public's profound distrust of official accounts and the speed at which misinformation can proliferate. The most famous conspiracy theory connects Lam's death to the 2013 tuberculosis outbreak in Skid Row, near the Cecil Hotel. This connection hinges on a bizarre coincidence. A new diagnostic test for multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis had been given the name LA Melissa. Conspiracy theorists immediately seize upon the similarity of the test name to Elisa Lam's name, proposing that she was somehow an unwitting victim of a government bioweapon test gone wrong, or that she was intentionally silenced because she was a carrier of a dangerous, secret strain of the disease. This theory, which lacks any credible evidence, gained traction because it offered dramatic, high-stakes explanation for the police's alleged secrecy and the impossibility of her death. It transformed a solitary tragedy into a global health cover-up. Another significant facet of the conspiracy vortex involved the aggressive targeting of Pablo Vergara Morbid. As mentioned previously, the online community discovered Vergara, a heavy metal musician, whose music videos, recorded years before Lam's death, featured violent themes and references to the Cecil Hotel. Despite the fact that Vergara had a verifiable alibi and was cleared by police, the online mob became convinced that he was the killer, driven solely by the circumstantial and irrelevant evidence of his artistic output. This campaign of cyberbullying and harassment demonstrates the ethical dangers of conspiracy vortex, where circumstantial online links are elevated above forensic fact, leading to real-world harm. Furthermore, the theorists obsessively analyze the elevator's functionality, proposing that the door's erratic behavior was proof of a remote-controlled intervention by an outside party attempting to trap or confuse her. They argue that the footage was tampered with, citing inconsistencies in the timestamps or the speed of the video, suggesting a deliberate cover-up by the police to protect the true culprit. The conspiracy vortex surrounding Elisa Lam's death is a psychological and sociological phenomenon. It arose because the official explanation, accidental death due to mental illness, was perceived as too simple, too mundane, and too unsatisfying to the collective consciousness. The physical impossibility of accessing the water tank provided the perfect entry point, allowing a host of unrelated facts, urban legends, and pure speculation to be combined into a sensational counter-narrative that continues to dominate the public discourse surrounding her case. The central, irresolvable conflict in the Elisa Lam case, the core fuel for every conspiracy theory, is the sheer physical impossibility of how she accessed and entered the water tank. To understand this challenge, we must engage in the elevator effect, a detailed deconstruction of the physics of the water tank and the roof access, attempting to reconcile the accidental drowning conclusion with the logistical facts. The roof of the Cecil Hotel was not easily accessible. The roof access door, even if faulty, opened onto a dangerous area with a high wall surrounding the perimeter. The 4 water tanks were massive, 8 feet tall, and sat on concrete platforms, making their top edges roughly 10 feet off the roof deck. To reach the top of a tank, one would either need to climb a maintenance ladder or use the small, adjacent maintenance blocks, neither of which would be an easy task for an individual in a stressed or weakened state. The most significant physical hurdle is the water tank lid. The lid was a heavy, industrial-grade piece of metal, designed to be closed to prevent contamination. While it was not bolted shut in the manner of a bank vault, it was heavy and awkward for a person inside the tank. It would be almost impossible to lift and climb out without external assistance. Conversely, for a person on the roof, lifting the lid, climbing in, and then pulling the lid back over the tank to submerge oneself is equally difficult. The official theory relies on the explanation that the lid was left ajar or unfastened, allowing a desperate, manic individual to slip inside and then drown when they were unable to lift the lid to escape. The elevator effect is a crucial conceptual leap that proponents of the accidental drowning theory must make. It posits that the psychotic episode not only rendered her unafraid of heights and danger, but gave her a temporary, overwhelming burst of manic energy and adrenaline that allowed her to accomplish the physically challenging feat. She may have climbed onto the platform using maintenance blocks and, with brute force and little regard for safety, pushed the lid back, believing the dark, cool water to be a portal or a safe refuge from her invisible pursuer. The logic of the psychosis is that she was operating outside the bounds of rational human strength or fear. Conversely, the conspiracy theorist counterargument hinges on this very physical difficulty. They assert that the required effort proves the involvement of an external party, a killer who either subdued Lam and placed in the tank, or who coerced into entering it while they held the lid open, then leaving it slightly ajar to mask the nature of the crime. The fact that the maintenance worker had to use a flashlight and climb a ladder to even see inside the tank highlights the sheer difficulty of the location. Ultimately, the physics of the water tank presents an irrefutable logistical contradiction. While the medical evidence points to accidental death, the engineering evidence strongly suggests external intervention. The failure to definitively reconcile these two sets of facts ensures that the mystery of Elisa Lam's final moments, trapped in a cold, dark cistern, will remain one of modern true crime's most haunting, unresolved questions. The global sensation surrounding the death of Elisa Lam resulted in a prolonged media frenzy that, while ensuring the case received attention, also raised profound ethical questions about the exploitation of human tragedy, the handling of mental illness, and the responsible use of primary source evidence. The moment the LAPD released the CCTV footage, the case crossed the line from local investigation to international spectacle. News outlets, social media platforms, and online documentary makers relentlessly broadcast the horrifying footage, repeating it countless times and subjecting Lam's final, desperate moments to minute-by-minute public dissection. This constant repetition fueled the conspiracy machine, but also became a severe invasion of her privacy and an exploitation of her vulnerability. The ethical primary concern centers on the treatment of a mentally ill individual. The footage is a document of a young woman's severe psychotic break. By broadcasting and rebroadcasting this deeply personal moment of distress, the media and the public effectively transformed her tragedy into a source of entertainment and morbid curiosity. The focus was quickly shifted from Elisa Lam, the person, a student and daughter battling a severe illness, to Elisa Lam, the mystery, sacrificing sensitivity for sensationalism. The case also became a lightning rod for the debate on responsible journalism in the digital age. The amateur sleuths and online communities, operated without editorial oversight or ethical restraint, repeatedly engaged in reckless speculation, doxing, and harassment of innocent people, such as Pablo Vergara. This incident demonstrated the need for established media to be cautious about validating or amplifying unverified online rumors. Yet many major outlets fell prey to the lure of conspiracy theories, prioritizing engagement and views over journalistic integrity. Furthermore, the Cecil Hotel itself and its owners were criticized for exploiting the tragedy. While the hotel eventually changed its name, its prior notoriety, cemented by the Lam case, became a perverse form of branding. The hotel was utilized as a macabre backdrop for films and documentaries, ensuring that the site of her death continued to profit from her tragedy. The exploitation of tragedy in the Elisa Lam case serves as a powerful cautionary tale. The pursuit of the sensational answer, the shadowy killer, the supernatural entity, overshadowed the simpler, more tragic truth. A young woman died because she was suffering from profound mental health crisis that went unrecognized or unchecked. The relentless media frenzy and the ethical lapse in handling her final moments have inflicted a secondary trauma on her legacy, raising the essential question of where the line must be drawn between the public's right to know and the victim's right to dignity, even in death. The enduring mystery of Elisa Lam's death, almost a decade later, is ultimately a story of unreconciled evidence and profound human tragedy. The quest for definitive truth is perpetually thwarted by the conflicting narratives presented by the forensic facts and the physical logistics. While the official conclusion of accidental drowning due to bipolar disorder is the most medically sound, supported by the lack of trauma, the inconsistent medication levels, and the classic signs of psychosis in the CCTV footage, it remains stubbornly challenged by the mystery of the water tank. The logistical impossibility of a single, confused, and physically weakened person bypassing a locked door and manipulating a heavy cistern lid is a gaping hole that the conspiracy theories will forever exploit. The true tragedy lies in the collision of these two elements: the reality of severe mental health crisis and the unforgiving, impossible physics of the Cecil Hotel rooftop. The most important legacy of the Elisa Lam case must be the call for mental health awareness. Her death was not the result of crime, but a catastrophic failure of care and recognition. Her terrifying final moments, captured on camera, are the stark, unforgettable visualization of a mind in extreme crisis, a silent scream for help that went unanswered. We urge institutions, particularly those in the hospitality sector, to implement immediate, mandatory mental health crisis training for all staff to recognize and safely intervene when guests exhibit signs of severe psychological distress. We demand a greater societal prioritization of mental health treatment and destigmatization, ensuring that individuals like Elisa Lam feel safe enough to seek and maintain medication consistency during periods of stress, such as solo travel. Finally, to the online true crime community and the media, we implore a shift in focus. Respect the dignity of the victim. Let the enduring memory of Elisa Lam be not the bizarre footage, but catalyst of systemic change, reminding us that the greatest mysteries often lie not in the conspiracies we invent, but in the vulnerable, fragile workings of the human mind. We must learn from her death to protect those still struggling in silence.